I was walking back from the store that evening, carrying nothing more than a bag of groceries, when something by the dumpsters caught my eye. At first I thought it was just another stray cat searching for scraps, but then it moved, slow and weak, and I froze in place. The animal was thin to the bone, its fur patchy and dull, ribs sticking out under the skin. Its eyes looked up at me, tired, half closed, as if it didn't even have the strength to be afraid. That was the moment I realized I was looking at a lynx, a young one, but unmistakably wild. My first instinct was to back away. A lynx wasn't something you stumbled upon in the city, but the way it stood there, trembling on its paws, made me hesitate. I expected hissing or a sudden lunge, but nothing came. It just lowered its head as if it had already given up. Something inside me twisted. I couldn't just keep walking. I crouched down slowly, speaking softly like I would to a house cat. My voice cracked a little, and the lynx only flicked its ears. I reached into the bag and pulled out some chicken I had bought for dinner. I tore off a piece and placed it gently on the ground in front of me. For a moment, it didn't move. Then it stumbled forward, sniffed, and snatched the meat with surprising speed. It chewed greedily, coughing at first, then swallowed. That sound of desperate eating hit me hard. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking. The first number I thought of was the local shelter. I explained what I had found, lowering my voice so people passing by wouldn't overhear. The woman on the line asked me to describe the animal. When I said the word lynx, she sighed. "We can't take wild animals," she told me. "That's not our responsibility. Try animal control." The call ended before I could argue. Animal control was my next attempt. Another cold voice, another rejection. "We don't handle exotic wildlife. It could be dangerous. Leave it be and let nature take its course." I stared at the lynx, hunched and trembling in the dirt, and felt my chest tighten. Letting nature take its course meant watching it die right there. I stuffed the phone back into my pocket. The lynx was licking the ground where the chicken had fallen, desperate for more. I tore off another piece and placed it closer to me. This time it came without hesitation, stopping just a foot away. I could smell the dirt and sickness in its fur. I had a crazy thought. If I reached out, would it let me? My hand shook as I extended it. The lynx froze, then leaned forward and snatched the meat from my fingers. No claws, no growl, nothing. Just hunger. I knew I couldn't leave it. It was too weak, too far gone. Without thinking any further, I set down the groceries and picked up the worn pet carrier I kept in the trunk of my car, left there from when I used to foster kittens. It was barely big enough, but maybe it would do. I brought it over slowly. The lynx looked at it, then at me. Its legs wobbled as if even standing was too much. I nudged the door open and slid another piece of meat inside. To my disbelief, the lynx stepped forward and crawled in, curling into the corner as if it was relieved to have somewhere dark and enclosed. I shut the door carefully, my heart pounding. I had just put a lynx in a carrier like it was a house cat. I could barely believe it myself. Carrying the crate back toward my building, I tried to keep my face calm, but I could already feel eyes on me. Mrs. Henderson from the second floor was walking her dog, and she stopped short. "New cat?" she asked, eyebrows raised. I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, a special breed. Kind of rare." She nodded slowly, clearly not convinced, but didn't push. By the time I reached my door, sweat was dripping down my back. I set the carrier inside and closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment. The lynx shifted inside, letting out the faintest sound, almost like a sigh. I crouched down and whispered, more to myself than to it. "It's okay now. You're safe." But deep down I wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The first night with the lynx was harder than I expected. Once I set the carrier down in my living room and opened the door, it didn't leap out or explore like I had seen foster cats do before. Instead, it crept into the corner of the room and sank down against the wall, curling itself into a tight ball. Its eyes stayed half open, watching me, but there was no energy left for movement. I set a bowl of water nearby, then placed some pieces of chicken on a plate. The smell filled the air, but the lynx didn't move. Hours passed, and still it lay there, silent. That night, I barely slept. Every sound from the corner made me lift my head. At one point I heard soft scraping noises and saw the lynx dragging itself to the water bowl. It drank greedily, then licked the floor around it as if nothing should go to waste. My chest ached watching it. It ignored the chicken until morning, when I found the plate empty, bones stripped clean. That was the first small relief. The following day, I sat on the floor across the room, keeping my voice calm. "It's okay. You're safe here." I repeated the words more for myself than for the lynx. At first it didn't look at me, but eventually its eyes flicked in my direction. I tore a piece of food, held it in my fingers, and extended my hand. My heart was racing. Slowly, the lynx crawled forward, sniffed, and took the piece. Its tongue brushed my skin. No claws, no aggression, just hunger. My shoulders dropped in relief. I kept feeding it this way for days. Each time it came closer, each time it hesitated less. By the end of the week, it would approach as soon as I sat down with food. Its steps were unsteady, but it was moving, and that meant everything. Sometimes it would return to the corner afterward, but other times it stayed near the couch, watching me as I moved around the apartment. Meanwhile, I had to face the building's gossip. Mrs. Henderson cornered me in the hallway again. "That's not a regular cat, is it?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. I forced a smile. "It's a Maine Coon. They can get really big." She didn't look convinced, but let it go, probably assuming I was just a strange young man with strange pets. The lie felt heavy, but it was easier than explaining the truth. Nights turned into a routine. I would set food, sit nearby, and wait. The lynx started testing the space, stepping out from the corner, sniffing the carpet, padding slowly into the kitchen. I stayed still, only watching. Once it brushed against a chair leg and flinched like it expected punishment. I felt anger rise inside me, not at the animal, but at the thought of how much fear was burned into its memory. Whoever had let it end up starving like that had left scars deeper than hunger. One evening, I stretched out on the floor with a book, pretending to read while keeping the lynx in sight. It circled slowly, sniffing everything. Then, to my surprise, it padded closer, cautious but steady, and sat just a few feet from me. The sound of its breathing filled the silence. I didn't move, afraid to ruin the moment. Finally, it lowered itself onto the carpet, curling into a loose shape, and let out a sound that was almost like a sigh. By the end of the second week, something shifted. When I sat down, it came without hesitation. One night, as I sat watching television, the lynx walked over and, without warning, stretched out near my legs. Its fur brushed against my jeans. I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, carefully, I rested my hand near its back, not touching, just close enough. It didn't move away. Minutes passed like that, both of us still. Then it let its head drop onto its paws, breathing deep, eyes closing. I sat there in the dim light, barely daring to breathe myself, realizing that this was the first time it had chosen to rest beside me. The fear, the hesitation, it was breaking, piece by piece. And for the first time since bringing it home, I felt hope. Maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe we were both learning to trust. Months passed, and the lynx was no longer the broken creature I had found by the dumpsters. The ribs that once pressed through its skin were hidden now beneath a thick coat of fur. Its eyes, once dull and clouded, were sharp and alert. It moved with a confidence I hadn't seen before, stretching across the living room, jumping up onto the couch, testing its strength with every stride. Sometimes I caught myself staring, unable to believe it was the same animal. Our routines became second nature. Every morning I'd prepare food, and it would wait by the kitchen door, tail twitching impatiently. Every night it would curl up nearby, close enough to feel like company, but still with a hint of independence. Trust had built slowly, but it was there. When I called softly, it would glance back at me, sometimes even approach. That simple response made me feel like we'd crossed an invisible line. I wanted to give it more than just four walls. The first time I put a leash on it, my hands were shaking. I had bought the largest harness I could find online, hoping it would hold. To my surprise, the lynx accepted it with little struggle, like it understood. We stepped outside together, and I braced for chaos. Instead, it followed me down the walkway, eyes scanning every corner, muscles tense but under control. People stopped and stared, of course. "Wow, what kind of cat is that?" a teenager asked, pointing. "Maine Coon," I answered with a practiced smile. "Biggest one you'll see around here." Laughter followed, but no one pressed further. Most just shook their heads, assuming it was some exotic pet. I felt the lie burn in my throat, but it kept us safe. We went to the park often after that. Kids whispered, adults snapped photos, and I kept repeating the same explanation. At first the attention rattled me, but the lynx seemed unfazed. It walked beside me, never pulling hard, ears twitching at every sound but never panicking. Once, when a dog barked and lunged, the lynx pressed closer to my leg instead of fighting back. I looked down, stunned by the quiet trust in that movement. As the weeks went on, I started taking it farther. We drove out to the lake one weekend. I watched as the lynx stepped carefully onto the sand, sniffed the air, and then bounded forward toward the water. It didn't swim, but it padded along the shore, leaving deep tracks in the wet sand. For the first time, it looked almost free. Sitting there on the grass, I realized how far we had both come since that night. Trips like that became our escape. Forest trails, quiet fields, back roads far from the city, places where no one questioned what kind of animal was on the leash beside me. Out there, it was just us. Sometimes it would pause and lean against my leg, its head brushing my hand as if reminding me it was grateful. Other times it would sit on a rock, staring at the horizon, and I felt like I was the one being allowed into its world. One evening, after a long walk in the park, we stopped by the corner store. As I locked the door to my apartment afterward, I noticed my neighbor from across the hall staring. Mr. Turner, a man who seemed to notice everything, was frowning. "That's not a cat," he muttered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I froze for a moment, forcing a chuckle. "Big cat," I said quickly, holding the leash tighter. "Maine Coon. You know how strange those breeds can look." His eyes narrowed, lingering on the lynx's muscular frame, on the way it moved. He didn't argue, but the suspicion was there. I could feel it, heavy and uncomfortable, even after I closed my door. That night, as the lynx curled up by the couch, I sat staring at the ceiling, the neighbor's words echoing in my mind. For months, I had been balancing between truth and safety. Now I realized that balance was fragile, and one wrong step could shatter everything. 2 years slipped by faster than I ever imagined. The lynx that once lay trembling in the corner of my living room was now a powerful, graceful creature. Its coat was thick and glossy, each movement deliberate, its muscles rippling under the fur. When it walked through the apartment, it wasn't with hesitation anymore, but with quiet authority, as if it knew it belonged there. People still asked questions when they saw us outside, but I had perfected the smile and the story. "Maine Coon," I'd say, and most would nod, though some still glanced twice. The truth was, I had grown used to living in this delicate balance. Every day was a mix of wonder and fear. Wonder, because the lynx had become my companion in ways I could never explain. Fear, because I knew one slip could unravel everything. But looking at it now, lying across the rug with its head resting on its paws, I realized how deeply it had become part of me. One quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. My thumb froze when I came across the first picture I had ever taken of it, the day I found it by the dumpsters. The difference was staggering. Back then, its body was nothing but bones and skin, eyes clouded, fur patchy and lifeless. I remembered the way it had stumbled forward just to drink water. Looking at that picture now, with the strong, majestic animal stretched out beside me, sent a chill down my spine. I barely recognized it as the same creature. I put the phone down and leaned back, trying to breathe through the sudden weight in my chest. It wasn't just about saving it. Somewhere along the line, it had saved me too. Before the lynx, my life had been quiet, routine, almost empty. Days blurred together. I came home to silence, woke up to silence. Now, every sound in the apartment, every scrape of claws against the floor, every low rumble of breath, reminded me I wasn't alone. Its second birthday came, and I decided to mark the moment. I baked a small cake for myself, something simple, and placed a piece of cooked chicken on a plate for the lynx. I lit a candle shaped like the number 2 and set it down on the table. Sitting across from it, I laughed quietly. "Happy birthday, buddy." The lynx blinked slowly, as if acknowledging the moment. I snapped a photo, capturing its steady gaze and the flicker of the candlelight. It was strange, maybe even ridiculous, but it felt important. That night, as it ate the chicken with calm precision, I thought about the years we'd spent together. All the walks, the nights it chose to curl against me, the mornings it waited by the kitchen door, all the times I'd leaned on its quiet presence when words failed. I felt gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. Gratitude to the animal in front of me, and maybe to something greater for crossing our paths that night at the dumpsters. But as the flame of the candle sputtered out, reality crept back in. How much longer could I keep this up? The neighbors already whispered, and suspicion wasn't going away. The lynx was bigger now, stronger. It wasn't a secret I could hide forever. Sitting there in the dim light, I found myself staring at its calm face, wondering what the future would hold for us. I couldn't imagine life without it, but I also knew the world might not forgive the truth so easily. For now, though, I let those thoughts slip away. I reached out, and it leaned gently against my arm, its warmth steady and grounding. Whatever came next, we had made it through 2 years together. That was more than I ever thought possible. There were times, especially in the beginning, when I lay awake at night asking myself if I had made a mistake. Bringing home a wild animal was reckless, maybe even dangerous, and I knew it. For months, I carried the fear that one day I'd wake up and it would all come crashing down. The lies I told my neighbors, the curious stares of strangers, the risk of being discovered. I pictured men in uniforms knocking on my door, taking it away, or worse. Those thoughts haunted me, and some nights I sat in the dark, listening to its steady breathing, wondering if I had doomed us both. But as the years passed, those doubts began to fade. What stayed instead was a truth I couldn't ignore. This lynx had given my life meaning in a way nothing else ever had. We had become a family, even if no one outside these walls would ever call it that. The lynx followed me from room to room, always close enough to remind me it was there. Mornings started with its steady presence, the sound of claws clicking lightly on the floor as it stretched. Evenings ended with the low, rhythmic sound of its breathing nearby, a comfort stronger than any words. On weekends, we still walked in the park or drove to the lake. People noticed less now. Some had grown used to seeing us together, while others had simply stopped asking questions. The lie about it being a Maine Coon had solidified into an odd sort of truth people accepted without much thought. It became almost a local story, that guy with the giant cat. No one knew the reality, and I clung to that fragile protection. What struck me most was how deeply it had woven itself into my life. I no longer felt the oppressive silence of the apartment when I came home. I no longer dreaded the long nights where the clock seemed frozen. Instead, I had companionship in its purest form. Quiet, steady, unspoken. The lynx didn't demand, it didn't pretend. It simply existed beside me, and somehow that was more powerful than any conversation. Sometimes, when it brushed against my arm or rested its head near my leg, I felt more connection than I had in years with other people. There were evenings when I would catch myself staring at it, wondering how I had been lucky enough to stumble across it that night by the dumpsters. Any other day, I might have walked by. Any other moment, I might have looked away. But I hadn't. I had stopped. I had chosen to care, and because of that, we both had a second chance. I thought about that often, about how fragile fate could be and how a single choice could redirect the course of 2 lives. One evening, I sat on the balcony with the lynx lying at my feet. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the air cooling as night approached. I bowed my head, hands folded loosely, and whispered a quiet prayer. Not the kind you read from a book, but the kind that comes from somewhere deeper, raw and honest. "Thank you," I said softly, "for this, for letting us find each other, for keeping us safe." It felt strange at first, but as the words left me, I felt lighter, as if someone, or something, was listening, as if all the fear and uncertainty had somewhere else to go. The lynx lifted its head, ears flicking, and looked at me with those sharp, steady eyes. For a moment, it felt like it understood every word. It pressed closer, resting against my leg, warmth seeping through the fabric of my jeans. I reached down, letting my fingers brush its fur, feeling the strength that had returned to its body over the years. The years of fear, the questions, the secrets, they all faded in that instant. What mattered was right there beside me, alive and breathing. I knew the future was uncertain. There would always be a risk, always a chance that someone would push too hard, ask too much, or demand the truth I wasn't ready to give. But sitting there, watching the last light fade from the sky, I realized it didn't matter in that moment. We had found each other in the most unlikely way, and we had saved each other in ways no one else would ever understand. That was the truth no one could take away from us. Later that night, as I turned off the lights and stretched out on the couch, the lynx climbed up and settled near me. Its breathing was slow and steady, its warmth a steady presence against the quiet air. I leaned back, letting the silence settle around us. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace, of knowing I wasn't alone. And in that moment, I understood, whatever happened next, we were bound together. Not by choice, not by circumstance, but by something stronger, something unshakable. We had rescued one another, and that was enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was more than enough.